Howdy, historians. All right, welcome back to Communist China. Now that we have seen the communist takeover, October 1949, at the end of those civil wars between the nationalists and the communists, we know Mao Zedong is in charge and that he's making a lot of different reforms to try to make China a true communist country. Remember, the number one goal of communism is to create a classless society where eventually there's no money, the government provides all, and everyone works together to make society work. So there's no social classes. Everyone's totally equal, right? So to try to do this, they built their one-party system. They discouraged religion. They centralized the economy and put it under government control. They removed the old upper and middle class from power. They expanded healthcare. They expanded education. They expanded opportunities for women. They tried collectivization, where they pool the land and labor and attempt to increase productivity, and they put forth their cultural revolution, where they try to transform society and make everyone support communism, right? And that was very violent at times, very violent at times. So lots of small reforms that they try early on. Now, I want to talk about one of the really big reforms that was attempted in China under the leadership of Mao Zedong, and that's the Great Leap Forward. All right, here's a propaganda poster from the time period, a little primary document here from the Great Leap Forward. All right, so this is China represented as the dragon. Okay, and then you have all the different people of society. You have the industrial workers, you have the party leaders, you have the farmers, you have the army. They're all making this big, beautiful bounty that is China, planes and ships and all the food you can handle, and they are moving towards, on China, a more prosperous future. All right, so the idea of the Great Leap Forward that we can see from this piece of propaganda, from this poster, is that this is an economic program that's supposed to help China. All right, so the Great Leap Forward is the economic idea of Mao Zedong and his party, and they're going to try to help the Chinese economy in the Great Leap Forward. So it's an economic program moving them forward. And the basic idea of the Great Leap Forward is that they were going to produce food in a new way, and they thought that they would be able to increase their food output and feed everybody, as well as sell off some surplus. And they also are going to try to modernize the economy of China, and they're going to try to make it more industrial, which means more like factory. So that way they can make stuff not only for the people, but again to sell on the international market. So then the government can be making money, so that way they can, provide goods and services to their people. So they roll out the Great Leap Forward in 1958. It's going to last from 1958 to 1962. And unfortunately, it's going to be a disaster. It is not going to work well. So one thing they tried is they tried communes. Okay, so communes, that's one of your vocab terms. communes, communes. This is where everybody shares the land as a community. There's no private property of ownership in communism. Remember that, right? So everything, like the land now, is a commune. Everyone owns it together. So these communes are there to try to increase food production. So a typical commune had several villages working together on one giant farm. So what the government would do is they took all the land. No one owned land in China. It's very hard to own land today, especially in rural China if you're a peasant farmer. But the government took all the farmland, and then they would have multiple villages work one giant farm together. Sometimes these things were tens of thousands of acres, and everyone worked them. Now, the idea was you're going to get everyone working together for the good of the country, for the good of each other, and they're going to work really hard. They're going to be the best versions of themselves. They're going to produce a ton of food, and this is going to have everything that they need, and they're going to produce a ton of food, more food than they need. Right? Well, the problem is everyone gets paid the same salary regardless of how hard they work. So there's no incentive for individuals to work hard. Everyone got paid the same no matter what. And then the government provided everything under communism: your food, your clothing, your shelter, your items, your materials, your house. So there's no incentive to work hard. So these farming communes were a huge failure because farming's really hard, and a lot of people just didn't show up. They didn't even own the land anymore. So the farming communes failed. They also tried communes for industrial production. So they would have government-owned factories where people were there to try to make some type of, industrial good. Think like radios, you know, clocks, refrigerators, dishwashers, stuff like that. So some of these items are going to be given to the people, some then they can sell. But again, there's no incentive. No one owns the factory. The government does. You get paid no matter what. You're asked to work hard, but there's really no incentive. So the commune farms failed and the communal factories failed as well. A lot of people just didn't work hard. A lot of people just simply didn't work at all. And even in the industrial side, the stuff they made was very low quality. And eventually, what happened is everything failed. The industrial side, the factory side, was a huge waste of money. And on the farming side, they actually didn't produce enough food. And then at the same time that the Great Leap Forward was failing, there was a drought. And it left millions on the brink of death or starving, or millions died as well. It's believed, because we never got very good numbers about this, and this is still a problem with China today. You don't get a lot of good information coming out of there because the communist government never wants to do anything that makes themselves look bad. So we never have great information about what's really going on in China. But during the Great Leap, from 1958 to 1962, we believe about 55 million people starved to death. 55 million people most likely starved to death during the Great Leap Forward because of the famine, drought, and failures of the agricultural communes. So it was an absolute disaster. The communes didn't work. The bad weather added to the problems and helped cause famines. There just weren't enough incentives for individuals to work hard. And then the policies were poorly ran and administered. The government just really wasn't up to the task, right? And you need something to make you work hard. Like, imagine if we said everyone's going to get an A plus in cultures and civ, and you never have to do any homework, and you never have to do any of the lessons. I'd really like you to do the lessons because it's for your own good, but you don't have to. You're going to get an A plus no matter what. Very few of you would do anything, right? Very few of you would work hard. Think about that revolution project. If I said, I just want you to do this, I'm not going to grade it. I just want you to do it. I'm going to grade it. You're all going to get an A plus. Do it or don't. You all get the A plus. Not many of you are going to do that work, right? You need incentive, and that's one of the biggest problems in communism. And with these communes, there's no incentive to work hard. Hey, we'd really like you to work hard, but you're going to get paid and have a house and have possessions no matter what. Most people aren't going to go out there and do that. So the Great Leap Forward was one example of a big-time economic program that communists put in, and it failed. It did not work. So luckily for the communists, they had strict enough control over their society and country that the Great Leap Forward didn't doom them. They kind of rebounded, they reorganized some things, they tried some new ideas. They eventually started to produce food. Most of China lived as a peasant in a state of poverty, but at least they were equal in some way, shape, or form. But the communists held on. And then eventually, Mao Zedong passed away. So China, they kind of struggled to find their way, but they held on to power after the failure of the Great Leap Forward, and then Mao Zedong died in 1976. Honestly, if it wasn't for the help of the Soviet Union for Russia, China's communist government probably would have collapsed. There were tons of mistakes, millions of deaths, but Mao Zedong was always seen as a hero because he saved China from foreign occupation. He gave them independence, and he gave them like pride. He restored their nationalist pride. So Mao Zedong was always seen as a hero despite all of his failures. Now, after Mao Zedong, they started to have some more moderate leaders that took power in China and that made some really good reforms. So the guy who comes in after Mao, just write his name in here real quick. His name is Deng Xiaoping. All right, so Deng Xiaoping is the leader that comes in after the death of Mao Zedong and is going to make some very, very good reforms for the country. Now, he is going to be more economic focused and had like a better understanding of the economy. And he put in this program that he called the Four Modernizations. The Four Modernizations. Modernize agriculture, modernize industry, modernize science, modernize the military. The four pillars of the economy, the four modernizations. Agriculture, industry, science, and the military. So that's going to be his big post-Mao reform for Deng Xiaoping, the four modernizations, the four modernizations. Modernize agriculture, modernize industry, modernize science, modernize the military. So he started to introduce some limited private ownership and some limited free market policies to try to modernize the economy. So he allowed entrepreneurs to start their own businesses. That's new because now an individual can own a business before only the government could. He also allowed some of these state-run factories to kind of have more freedom to make decisions so they could run better. So he's allowing entrepreneurs and more freedom of decision making in the economy. He also allowed for foreigners to start to invest in the economy and invest into the country. So those were the big things he was doing to modernize industry. Allow entrepreneurs to start their own businesses, give the state-run companies some more freedom to make decisions, and allow foreign investment. When it came to modernizing agriculture, everyone was given land. The government still owned it, but what they really did is they got rid of the communes because they knew those didn't work. So they've got to modernize agriculture by giving everyone a piece of land. The government still owns the land. The people don't. The government takes a share of the crops, and then the farmers keep the rest or sell the rest. So that way they can feed their people, but there's more incentive to work because it's yours, and you can sell any extra that you have. They also had a lot of focus educationally on the field of like science, like today what we call like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Starts to get a lot more emphasis in their educational fields so that they can modernize science. And then they modernize their military by spending more on their military because that also then creates jobs, right? So the four modernizations were overall pretty successful. The economic gap between rich and poor drastically increased at this time, and there was a huge division between the rural and urban populations in China at this time, but overall the economy grew. Also, crime and corruption grew, which we'll see more when we look at some of the demographic problems. But Deng Xiaoping and the four modernizations after the death of Mao Zedong were seen as very successful. And Deng Xiaoping and his four modernizations really are seen as like the saviors of communism. That if they hadn't made these changes, communism could have collapsed. Because like they can't rely on Russia, they can't rely on the Soviet Union forever. They need to figure out how to do things on their own. And overall, again, these economic policies of the four modernizations were successful, and they started a new pattern that we see in China that we'll talk about more and more moving forward here in the next week or two. China's a mix of one-party communism, but also free market capitalism. Like in communism, there should be no entrepreneurs. In communism, there should be no private ownership. In communism, you shouldn't be making any decisions in a factory. They should all be made by the centralized government. But China starts this hybrid where they're a one-party communist country, but they also allow for some entrepreneurship. They allow for some private ownership. Deng Xiaoping and the four modernizations started that, and we'll get a lot of information moving forward about how those things continue to change and develop over time. So the communists take over in 1949. Mao Zedong is at the helm. He's leading them until 1976. He does just enough to keep them alive, basically. He does just enough to keep them afloat with the help of Russia and the Soviet Union. And then Deng Xiaoping comes in afterwards with the four modernizations and really saves communist China and starts them on the path of a mix of communism and capitalism that has led to their huge rise in economics and power today, that we see today, which we'll start to see more and more as we move forward. So the next time I see you guys, we're going to talk about some of the demographics, like the people, the population, the religions, politics and economics of modern China, and then some of the problems that those demographics cause too. So now that we've seen the impact of the dynasties and the impact of the communist takeover, the impact of Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, now we can start to take a look at more of the modern side of China, which is some really, really fascinating information. All right, so great job. Hop over to the assignment section and complete the assignment for today. So that way you're all set and you're ready to go. And then I will see you next time. If you have any questions, hit me up. Let me know. Great job today. Until next time, my friends, have a good one. Adios.